Kobolds and Catacombs, a return to form for this Hearthstone expansion. A return to monsters, treasure, and dungeons, all based around those little rat-like creatures called kobolds. Let's dive into the background of what was released with this one, shall we? First and foremost, if you're not too familiar with geek culture, Kobolds and Catacombs is a reference to Dungeons & Dragons, which is a return to form for the Warcraft-style card game because many features from Warcraft were lovingly copied from D&D to begin with. Beholders, kobolds, goblins, orcs, elves, the whole 9 yards. D&D is the cornerstone game for many fantasy story enthusiasts, and this expansion is the love letter to it, especially with its new Dungeon Run mode. You see, Dungeon Run isn't just a mode where you run against 8 different decks. Consider it more like a miniature campaign. You go through the monsters with new powers, deal with lost adventurers, and make your way through trapped rooms, all to take down an epic final boss while building your deck along the way. Much like an adventurer in a dungeon would upgrade their gear with the new weapons and armor they would find. You're taking on the role of an adventurer here in classic D&D fashion. And these dungeons and loot were collected by the kobolds. Famous in WoW for inhabiting mines and wearing lit candles on their head, they make up the bulk of lower level enemies and sometimes even attach themselves to larger creatures. They tend to be fairly unintelligent, mostly focused on digging and collecting treasure. However, they all share a fear of the darkness, which is why they have candles on their heads. This fear is not an unfounded one. Old gods and their minions tend to live underground where the kobolds dig. The final boss, called the Darkness, is a void creature born from the old gods who also makes his appearance in World of Warcraft, albeit in a much smaller role. Interesting to note is that in Dungeons & Dragons, kobolds are actually reptilian creatures who often serve dragons. They share many of the same qualities as Warcraft kobolds though, such as living in huge clans, collecting treasure, and being extremely violent. In fact, let's take a look at the monsters from this expansion and show just how they are an homage to Dungeons & Dragons. The Dire Mole is a reference to dire creatures in D&D. Dire creatures are huge, stronger versions of regular animals. The Dire Mole is a huge mole, making it slightly more dangerous. But only slightly, though. Toothy Chest is a reference to the Mimic, a creature that takes on the form of an inanimate object until adventurers get close. Then it tries to eat them. It tries to eat them a lot. Zola the Gorgon is a reference to the Gorgons of Greek mythology, such as Medusa. D&D has a creature just like this named the Medusa, but oddly enough their version of the Gorgon is a metallic bull that spits poison gas. This is due to D&D pulling the name Gorgon for a different Greek mythological beast whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce, so here it is. Hoarding Dragon is a reference to the dragons of D&D fame, who famously slept on large piles of treasure. Admittedly, this is not exactly a direct D&D reference, as they didn't invent dragons hoarding treasure, but D&D certainly has its fair share of dragons and hoards, that's for sure. The oozes are also common in D&D, but in particular the carnivorous cube is a reference to the slimes of D&D fame, who are square, mindless, and dissolve anything and everything within their bodies. It's common to see the skeletal remains and leftover gear of a former victim floating within them. If you aren't convinced by now at this being a reference to Dungeons & Dragons, I highly suggest watching Ben Brode, the game director of Hearthstone, introduce the expansion at the 2017 BlizzCon event. He took the audience through a D&D-style adventure, presenting them with choices and letting them determine the story, revealing upcoming cards along the way. I, for one, am a big fan of the dungeon crawl style and hope they keep it for future expansions. If not the theme, at least the game mode. As an avid Dungeons & Dragons player myself, it's been very fun to see a Warcraft game return to those roots with a fresh take on that classic style. And who knows, we might see some of these creatures in World of Warcraft eventually. The Tortolan, for example, from the Ungoro expansion, was announced to be in the next WoW expansion, so the two teams clearly have no problem copying each other's notes. But until then, I hope you enjoy your next dungeon run with a new look at the creatures that make up this expansion. Thank you for watching The Frost Fables. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons, and take care, everybody.